the way to get this done, the way to get Brexit done, is, I think, to be reasonable with Parliament and say, if they genuinely want more time to study this excellent deal, they can have it, but they have to agree to a general election on December the 12th. And that's the way forward, because this Parliament's been going on for a long time without a majority. It's refusing to deliver Brexit. It's impossible to deliver legislation. It's time, frankly, that the opposition summoned up the nerve to submit themselves to the judgment of our collective boss, which is the people.
Here we go. Here we go. Here we effing oh. Today, in an interview with the BBC's Laura Coinsberg, Boris Johnson announced his intention to have a general election on the 12th of December, but it seems like we won't be rid of Johnson by Christmas because the Labour Party have, again it seems, declined. What to make of this somewhat counterintuitive situation? Are Labour avoiding a trap or missing a historic opportunity? On tonight's Emergency Tisky Sour, I'm joined by a friend of the show, author and journalist, Owen Jones. How are you feeling? What the hell is going on?
WTAF. I think that's what this qualifies for. I think, firstly, we do have to be clear, by the way, so this is not all framed, the coverage on the terms of the government, that Boris Johnson said that Britain would leave on the 31st of October. In fact, many of you probably if you listen to radio stations today, you'll have heard get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. He said it was do or die. He would die in a ditch. The only thing that died in a ditch was an impossible promise he made before he capitulated to the EU's red line. So I think that has to be front and centre in this whole discussion, you know. But at the same time, what Labour should... the reason he's made this offer, by the way, is his own party's split. Some of them don't want an election until Brexit is done, which was what they thought was an existential issue. Whilst others were like the Vote Leave faction, Dominic Cummings, that faction, they want to go for election now. People versus Parliament. They
want to have a Brexit election because they've already done it once, right?
Exactly.
And they won it before.
So
I think they can win it again.
Well, they didn't win it. There was a hung Parliament.
They won the
referendum.
The Leave versus,
yes, sorry.
It's Vote Leave now in number 10. They want to do the referendum again.
Exactly. They want it to be a referendum rerun. But I think what this whole offer is to try and triangulate those two factions, which is to say what the Tories are trying to do is ram through their deal and then have an immediate general election afterwards. Now, Labour should not be playing this game at all. And in terms of, obviously, that's a trap in terms of let's have more time to try and ram through this terrible Brexit deal, which will devastate the living standards of millions of people, is bad for the economy, will start a race to the bottom in hard-won workers' rights, environmental and social protections and so on. So what Labour has to demand is the withdrawal agreement bill is withdrawn in exchange for a general election on the 12th of December. And that's what Labour should be arguing for. Now, it's not ideal having an election in the middle of December. It's cold, it's dark, people don't want to interrupt their Christmas shopping. I appreciate all of that. But this could be the last opportunity to have an election that stops him ramming through his deal. The danger is otherwise what's going to happen is, in the coming weeks, the dynamic will be mounting pressure, the momentum will be to try and drive through that bill and then have a general election where he's triumphant, where the Lib Dems will try and exploit the anguish, the trauma that some Remainers will feel when Brexit actually happens. So what Labour should be doing now, and they haven't made this decision, but they urgently need to make this decision, is to say, bring it on. Let's have the general election. And a general election, the most important general election for generations that will determine whether we have a race to the bottom in hard-won rights, a self-inflicted terrible economic shock that working class people will suffer the consequences of, the continued gutting and privatisation of public services, Britain carries on being a playground for the rich, or that the rich will finally pay their taxes and that money will be used to invest in public services. The housing crisis will be ended with a mass construction of amazing, affordable housing that people deserve in one of the wealthiest countries on earth. That tuition fees will be scrapped. That utilities will be brought into public ownership, and the people will be able to decide, not the politicians, on the future of Brexit. That's the election that now beckons. It's a historic election that will determine the future of this country. But Labour has to step up, because at the moment, you have different factions of the Parliamentary Labour Party. You've got one faction who are in Leave constituencies who fear a pre-Brexit election because they fear that will turf them out. There are others who want a referendum before an election, which is just a fantasy.
It's not going to happen. Does anyone seriously believe that, though? Because
they're still arguing for it.
Yeah, but do you think they're genuinely arguing for it? Because I think for a while I was sort of open to this idea that maybe you have a referendum before a general election. I could see the attraction of it. But since Boris Johnson has come back with a deal and it seems to have a route to being passed, it doesn't seem like there is so much parliamentary impasse anymore, which means it won't happen. But are people just pretending to want a second referendum before a general election?
Well, the mistake that met was because there should have been, in hindsight, and I erred on that side, but I could see the other argument, there should have been, the opposition party should have agreed to an election back in September. And the reason they didn't was twofold. And they overlap. There was that faction, obviously in good faith, as we all did, feared a no-deal crash out midway through an election campaign. That wasn't a conspiracy theory. Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's advisor, was openly briefing the media about that possibility. And the other was those who wanted a second referendum before a general election with a focus on the so-called Government of National Unity to secure it, led by Ken Clarke, who now backs the deal. So that was a great calculation. But the error they all made, and everyone made, was the presumption that Boris Johnson was heading for no deal. They didn't anticipate him capitulating to the EU's red lines, throwing his DUP allies under a bus, establishing a customs border down the Irish Sea, and then getting the Tory party to cravenly line up behind it. No one anticipated that. So that was the miscalculation that was made back in September. But now there is an opportunity to have this historic general election, which will determine the future of this country for a generation or more, possibly, in a way which will realise the hopes and dreams of millions of people, or lead us into an extremely dark place. And if that opportunity isn't grabbed, the danger is he's going to ram it through, because the other faction of the Parliamentary Labour Party are those who think that now, because the programme motion, so this was the motion where the Tory party were going to ram through Brexit before their former Brexit before the 31st of October. Now it gives far more time to scrutinise it. So the bet they're making is the coalition that Boris Johnson has stitched together, which stretches from the ERG, that's the hardcore Tory Brexiteers, to the Labour leavers. The contradictory promises will mean that coalition will unravel with more scrutiny. That is a hell of a bet. And the other danger is, if all the opposition parties rule out an election now, and are seen to rule out an election, Boris Johnson will say to the EU they can't agree on an election. The argument pushed by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, which is that should only be a 2-week extension, will be strengthened. So what Labour should argue now, passionately, they should come out swinging, mobilise their activists, have a hopeful speech by Jeremy Corbyn about what's at stake, what can be achieved, the optimism, the courage, the determination that, what a Britain that is within reach. In exchange for dropping the withdrawal agreement bill, have a general election, a 7-week campaign, which is how long it was last time.
You can't demand that, though. It doesn't. If you. So there's a number of ways you can get a general election.
Yeah.
So what Boris Johnson is suggesting at this point is you do it via the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which means you need 2/3 of MPs to vote for it. That's why he needs the Labour Party on side. I think if that happens, you don't get to make any amendments. So it will be in Boris Johnson's control on what date the general election falls.
Yeah, it has to be, though. There has to be. So basically, the options are, because there has to be enough campaigning time, so it'll only be the 5th of December or the 12th of December. The other is, of course, that there's a piece of legislation which is a one-line piece of legislation which says, notwithstanding the Fixed Term Parliament Act, the election...
So that's if they can't get the 2/3, they can get a simple majority with a one-line
a simple majority through,
motion.
and that could be amended. I mean, that's, you could add votes for 16 and 17-year-olds as one view is pushed. But that should be the central negotiating position of the Labour Party. Give us a general election in December, not ideal, as I've said, in exchange for dropping the withdrawal agreement bill. You are not going to get, this is what they want. They want the best of both worlds. They want to be able to ram through their terrible, shocking, disgraceful deal, and then they want to go straight into a general election, triumphant, say, Boris Johnson's the great deliverer, he did this, now he'll do all the other things he said. So Labour have to stop this in its tracks. They have to demand a general election with the withdrawal agreement bill dropped. And that's the only... And the other opposition parties are just... the SNP and the Liberal Democrats, it's just fantasy, stupid, naive politics. And at this rate, the risk is...
What are they demanding at this point? I haven't really got up to date with what... The SNP are talking about a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson, aren't they?
Yeah, and again,
That wouldn't pass because his Queen's speech has just passed.
No, exactly. I mean, it's just
which is a proxy for that.
no,
Really.
exactly. I mean, look, it is in the SNP's interest to have an early vote because they have
A court case coming.
They have a court case. We need to be
down the
careful
road.
because of sub judice legal stuff. But they are very keen, let's say, to have an election this side of Christmas for their own reasons. They're riding high in the polls, so it makes sense for them anyway. And the Liberal Democrats at the moment, the consensus is don't fall into Boris Johnson's trap. Of course, there's a way of not falling into his trap, which is to agree to a general election in exchange with withdrawal agreement bill being junked. Let the people decide. If people want a Brexit deal which will scrap workers' rights, environmental and social protections, hit people's living standards, and have a hard right Tory government full of some of the most reactionary, obnoxious people in the country running the country for the next 5 years, let the people decide that. But otherwise, people might say, well, actually, the people should decide on Brexit, as well as we'd like the rich to pay more taxes, we'd like utilities under public ownership, we want to genuinely end austerity and the cuts that have come with a lost decade of Tory rule. Let the people decide that. But Labour has to have the courage and determination. And that means overruling a parliamentary Labour Party, or some of the parliamentary Labour Party, who are the obstacle here. They do not want a general election for many different reasons. And the leadership should say, we will impose a whip. That's what happened last time.
Well, let's park the PLP just for one moment. Because I want to look at... I mean, we've been on a bit of a roller coaster ride in terms of what the leadership are actually saying they want. So we're going to go through... I think some of the tweets as we saw them today. So I think about an hour and a half ago, you had Matt Dafin, who's from The Sun. I keep trying to find an alternate source for these tweets, but then it gets very close to us going on air. He said, "New Labour will reject the PM's offer of an early election. Jeremy Corbyn will announce tonight comes following an emergency meeting of his shadow cabinet." Then about so everyone was thinking, oh, they've rejected it. Then about 20 minutes later, Lewis Goodall from Sky, update. Labour has not made decision yet. Party currently in deep discussions. The shadow cabinet is split. They're trying to figure out which is the real trap. Everyone's talking about traps. To reject or accept. I'm told that contrary to reports, there wasn't an emergency shadow cabinet meeting earlier. Then to clarify, Jeremy Corbyn later on gave a pool clip. That means an interview to probably the BBC, which will be on the 10 o'clock news tonight. And in response to a question about when, at what point they will be willing to call an election, he says, no deal is a threat. So asked to clarify what he means by saying we'll have an election as soon as no deal is taken off the table. He says, no deal is a threat that Boris Johnson has been using all along, and indeed it's included in his legislation that is before Parliament at the moment. The legislation that he's paused. I want us to not crash out of the EU because of all the damage it will do to jobs across the country. So one possibility there is he's saying, not only does no deal have to be off the table for the period of the general election, but for, I suppose, the whole foreseeable future. I mean, it's just... What's going on? It's confusing, right?
I think, look, the clear position should be the people will decide in the middle of December what the future will be as regards Brexit and obviously the issues we should be talking about. The housing crisis, the crisis of public services, the worst squeezing living standards since the Victorian era. They will decide all of those things in a general election. We can't just end up in a situation where hypothetically no deal is always a potential and therefore we can never have a general election.
It's like we need to write up a whole new constitution, which means that falling out on a no deal is
what
impossible
do?
unless you have a 2/3 majority in Parliament.
What do we do? Invent
a
constitution. Look, and to regard just quickly on one of the earlier points about do they actually think this about a second referendum? And Labour MP has I won't name them, but they've just tweeted at me in response to me saying all the opposition parties are making a mistake in not demanding an election in exchange for the withdrawal agreement being dropped in Parliament and extension agreed. Obvious thing to do. They've tweeted me, not at all, we cannot trust Johnson. We must amend the withdrawal agreement bill and put it back to the people. #confirmatory vote. This is just ridiculous.
I mean, presumably you can name that MP because they replied to you publicly. Who is that?
I mean, it's
not a DM, right?
No. It's Preet Kaur-Gill, who is the Labour and Co-op MP for Birmingham Edgbaston. Huge respect to Preet. I'm sure a brilliant local constituency MP. But that does not make any sense. There is not.
It is delusional, right?
There's no majority in Parliament for a second referendum. The argument of let's keep literally. So the argument then is to go, don't have an election, keep the withdrawal agreement bill being debated and scrutinised until eventually Boris Johnson, after that amendment does not pass, then eventually he'll just drive it through, get a majority for it. I mean, it's just ludicrous.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I suppose, so there are two, it's interesting actually because the Remainers seem to be split as well. So part of the people who are, Remain first, potentially Labour second, or their priority is remaining in the European Union. They're split. So Ian Dunt today wrote an article which was saying that Remainers need to now unite around the demand for a general election, because if you don't have it now,
he's accepted there is no majority for a referendum.
The deal will squeeze through by January or something. But there are other people in the People's Vote who, their number one priority is to stop Brexit. And I saw the People's Vote campaign itself was retweeting, I can't remember precisely which MP, but an MP sort of saying, no, what we have to do is we have to deny him the opportunity for a general election, which is a trap, and we have to force a People's Vote. Do you think that there are people within the People's Vote who are now happy to let Brexit happen if it means that, if it lowers the chances of a Jeremy Corbyn government?
Look, there's always been two types of Remainers, and I think in terms of voters, the vast majority are just people who think Brexit is a bad thing, which is terrible for the country, a self-inflicted disaster in varying degrees, bad for the economy and so on, and bad for, depends on their position, international standing, that kind of thing. And there were others who may or may not believe that, but also saw it as a convenient means to undermine the Labour leadership and drive a wedge between the Labour leadership and Labour voters and Labour members who, in the case of members, overwhelmingly voted for Remain, and in terms of Labour voters, decisively voted for Remain. And we have to disentangle that, because obviously there are lots of Remainers in good faith who genuinely just want a route back to Remain. And actually,
most of them now want a general election, is that the case?
Of course, yes, they do. And Ian Dunt is a striking...
Because now is the only chance to stop Brexit.
Ian Dunt is a striking example. He's your kind of centrist...
in that very article, actually, he says Jeremy Corbyn has been a horrendous leader of the opposition.
Of course, look, and I'm saying that I've had huge... Look, this is olive branch time.
I actually want to get him on the show soon.
You should. I mean, I've got huge disagreement. I'm interviewing James O'Brien, similar position on Monday. But Ian Dunt, someone I've had huge disagreements with. But he is somebody who genuinely wants to stop Brexit from happening. And even though he has huge disagreements and problems with the Labour Party, he will argue for at least voters to vote for whichever party is most likely in each constituency to allow that to happen. Now, he knows the only route to Remain is a Labour-led government. That's the only possible route. And so it's clear in the general election, many of those who've currently defected to the Liberal Democrats or the Greens because they're angry about Labour on Brexit, they will now, it will be very clear in the general election that the only route to Remain is a referendum between a deal which doesn't destroy the economy and trash the Northern Ireland peace process or destabilise it, or Remain. And that's the only way out. And I think that's what's interesting, that you're already seeing individuals like that who've been very, very critical and hostile towards the Labour leadership, accepting that's the way back. So you can see already within an election campaign how Labour's polling, which has collapsed, but it's still not it's as bad as it was before 2017. But the difference is the Tories are nowhere near as ahead as they were in 2017. Theresa May was more popular than Thatcher and Blair in their pomp. Boris Johnson is not. He might not be extremely unpopular as Jeremy Corbyn currently is, but he's very unpopular. And you can see how in a general election, when Jeremy Corbyn goes in campaigning mode, the popular domestic policies are front and centre, and Remainers can see that the only route back is through a Labour victory. You can see how things can be turned around. And as the Tory Brexit deal is unpicked and revealed, actually, maybe our media will put it under some scrutiny, which they haven't so far. They've just treated it as a theatre and drama. And as Peter Oborne, the very courageous, I think, small C conservative commentator puts it, you've got journalists just parroting lines fed to them by Dominic Cummings and others, smears, lies, all the rest of it. In a general election campaign, it will come under proper scrutiny, and I think it can unravel. And I think a lot of leavers will realise that this is a terrible deal and all the rest. So that's the position we've got to... Labour MP ringing there. It'd be interesting to see what they think, but I won't name who they are. So I just think we have to...
Put them on live. That'd be good.
Hiya.
Do you want to phone directly into Tomorrow Media's Tisky Sow? We can find out what you think about a general election being called tomorrow.
There's an obvious way. There's an obvious way through, and I think now there should be pressure put on the Labour leadership from both those on the left and Remainers to support a general election in exchange for the withdrawal agreement bill being dropped.
What do you think? So, we've touched on it slightly, but in terms of this trap idea, and it is plausible, or it is, I suppose, it's difficult to know what to think about it, which is that Dominic Cummings' first choice is to have a general election, it seems now, and he can have a general election on, are you going to stop Brexit, or are you going to get Brexit done, or are you going to have a quite long-winded second referendum with the Labour Party? If he wants a general election in December, is there not a strong argument to say, well, if he wants it, we shouldn't have it?
Yeah, I think.
I mean, that's what lots of MPs are arguing.
We've got to stop seeing Cummings, I think, is this kind of Machiavellian,
He's probably Machiavellian. He just might not be that.
Yeah, sorry,
much of a genius.
He's obviously Machiavellian. But I think he's, look, there was a very good drama made about him, and I think maybe that's kind of inflated our view about his role in the Leave campaign. He obviously played a very decisive role within that Leave campaign, but Brexit was not won because of this one individual, Dominic Cummings. There was far broader reasons than that, and I think it obviously would have won without Dominic Cummings. And those who oppose it who are most critical of it are Tory cabinet ministers who actually have to represent voters. And a lot of them, we had the same thing last time. You had Tory advisors who pushed very, very hard for general election, and you had Tory ministers and MPs in certain seats who were very sceptical about it. And they turned out to be right, and these supposed geniuses were proven...
Advisors take more risks, I suppose, right?
It's easy
they can go get another job after.
It's easy to do... Well, yeah, I mean, although...
I think MPs struggle to get jobs after.
I mean, to be fair, Nick Timothy is an example of, someone who got everything wrong and has about 3 different jobs.
Yeah.
But that's how the establishment works in this country. So I would not put... At the moment, there's a division in government. And at the moment, you can see the Tories are losing their seats in Scotland. And let's not forget, without those seats in Scotland, they would not be in government. I mean, they won 11 seats.
Who do they lose them to be clear? To the SNP?
Yes, the SNP. I mean, the SNP at the moment, let's not forget, in 2015, they won 56 out of 59 seats. Yeah. Look, there's a very big risk Labour will lose their seats in Scotland, a lot of them. I hope that won't happen. But the difference is...
It will be to the SNP, not
to an anti-Tory bloc,
yeah.
not to the Tories. You can see them losing seats in the southwest to the Liberal Democrats, and you can see the same in certain other constituencies. And you can see how Labour could advance forward in places like Putney, where the Tory majority fell from 10,000 back in 2015 to 1,500 in 2017. Hastings and Rye, again, Amber Rudd only clung on to that seat by her fingertips last time, and she's not standing again. Therefore, the incumbency factor is gone. You can see already lots of different seats that are in play, potentially. So, and the Tory calculation is they will sweep across, basically, small-town working-class communities in the North and the Midlands. That was exactly Theresa May's strategy last time round. And this time, they've got a less popular, far posher front person who's far easier to be portrayed as...
We actually forget how popular Theresa May was at the beginning of that campaign, right? She was more popular than Thatcher at her peak,
absolutely, and Blair. I mean, look, do you not remember the beginning of that election campaign?
She was untested, though. Boris Johnson is slightly more tested than she was.
I mean, that's why he's far less popular to begin with. I mean, look, Theresa May, was so popular, they ran a presidential campaign, they scrubbed... Do you remember the campaign buses at the beginning of the campaign?
They scrubbed Conservatives, and it was just all
Theresa
about Theresa May, yeah. And it turned out she was shit.
And people were debating, I remember being on shows going, why, the reality is she's just so popular in these communities, in Labour constituencies. She's genuinely
she did run a historically bad campaign, but it's all getting a little bit speculative.
Wait a minute, let's go back to that campaign quickly, though, because I think we need to be careful there. Because let's not forget, there were 2 horrific terrorist attacks in a campaign when Labour was being portrayed as the pawn of terrorists. You had local elections which Labour were battered, literally 4 weeks before polling day, which were terrible and very demoralising headlines for Labour. You had some terrible car crash interviews, which were zoned in on, that Labour did. Look, we could go on. I think it's, it's revisionist to just look back. On election day, there was there were polls, including internal Labour polling, showing the Tories had a 13-point lead on polling day. So, we need to be aware that actually the way that campaign is portrayed is often, with hindsight, we look back at how it collapsed and unravelled.
Has Labour changed their pollster? Have you got any?
They have, yeah. BMG was their last one.
Probably for the best.
They sucked. So I just think, I'm not saying, look, there's every chance that this could go very badly wrong. There's, anyone who puts a bet on this election is delusional, naive, a con man, all the rest of it. And Labour's polling is bad. Jeremy Corbyn's polling is bad. Maybe it will all go Boris Johnson's way. Maybe Labour will implode and all the rest of it. But maybe with broadcasting rules in place, with a mass membership, with political interest uptick, meaning the social media videos of Momentum, which reached a quarter of the population last time, go viral once again. But when Labour's domestic policies are front and centre, and Labour can still put them front and centre on the basis that we have to tackle the issues that led to Brexit in the first place, like the collapse in living standard, or the stagnation in living standards, like the housing crisis, it is all to play for. Labour could turn this around. So it's completely,
absolutely, yeah.
it's completely within reach, and we can't forget that. But Labour have to take a courageous decision now, back an election with the withdrawal agreement bill abandoned.
Let's talk about, you alluded to it a moment ago, the PLP, but first of all, you're watching Navarro Media, you're watching Chisky Sour. It looks like a general election is going to be called, and we want to be firing on all cylinders. So to make sure we can, please go to support.navarromedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. If you are already a subscriber, thank you very much. You make this show possible. As ever, please like this video. Keep your comments coming. Share it on Facebook. Share it on Twitter. I'll go to your comments and questions at the end. The PLP. We've been debating now what the leadership should decide to do. It's still unclear what they'll decide to do. It could be that they try and hold off a general election and feel like they'll be more confident in the spring for whatever reason. But say they do decide from the top that what they want to do is accept this offer for a general election, so long as Boris Johnson removes his threat of passing the withdrawal agreement bill. There'll be potentially people in the PLP who refuse to vote for this, and I want to, I suppose, how concrete are anonymous briefings. But in any case, let's go to some tweets yesterday, which were widely shared from Nicholas Watt at Newsnight. So it was a thread about all these MPs saying they were not going to vote for a general election, and it peaked really with another Labour MP takes issue with my tweet that around 140 Labour MPs would oppose an early election. This MP says only 8 MPs will vote for it, which would mean that 237 Labour MPs oppose an early election. And then this is a quote from the MP. It's literally the only thing that the PLP are united on, the MP tells me. I mean, this is not really worth tweeting, to be honest, an anonymous briefing that says that only 8 Labour MPs are going to vote with the leadership. But let's ignore the silliest element of that particular claim. It is a real threat, is it, that many people on the backbenches of the Labour Party will refuse to go along with the leadership if they decide they want to have a general election as soon as possible?
This was all said last time. Last time round, the whole fixation was Theresa May could not get an early election because it would be Labour MPs being turkeys voting for Christmas, and therefore under the provisions of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, she wouldn't get it through. And that, in fact, apparently what she gambled upon was she wouldn't get a 2/3 majority, and therefore she'd go for a no confidence route. Which is why the election was 7 weeks long, which is not what she expected. She thought it'd be 5 weeks long because of the 2-week window, which happens in a no confidence scenario. If the government lose a no confidence vote, then you have a 2-week period where someone else can try and form a government. So what happened last time is, when Labour were in a far worse position than they are now, electorally speaking, is about what 20 MPs voted against. If Labour whip it, even if there's a much bigger rebellion than that, it can still pass if all Tories vote for it.
You mean the whip it in terms of that anyone who's a shadow minister has to vote for it?
Exactly. So if the entire front bench, if you impose a 3-line whip, then all the front bench and the
shadow ministers,
shadow ministers, the payroll is
even though do you get paid? You don't get paid extra if you're on the opposition
not
benches anyway, but it's still
all
called the payroll
PPSs,
vote,
parliamentary private secretaries, and so on. So that's a massive chunk of people. And again, a lot of backbenchers will do it. It's the same last time. You only need. He needs about 190 MPs to vote that way, and of course he'll get that. If Labour whip it, then an election can get through.
Do you think they should go hardball and not only whip it, but make it a confidence issue, which would be to say, if you don't vote with the leadership on this issue, because this is this isn't a political disagreement, this is about whether or not you want the Labour Party to replace the Conservative Party in government. Do you think they could say, if you rebel on this one, you lose the whip? Potentially be a somewhat roundabout way to get a PLP that's potentially more favourable or friendly towards a leadership if we were actually to enter government.
I think the problem is with that is it's just not going to happen, so it's kind of a waste of time debating it. I mean, I wrote a piece last week saying the whip should be withdrawn from any MP who votes for Boris Johnson's deal, and the point that was put to me is that the last time the whip was withdrawn from a Labour MP over a policy issue was like the 1940s. It's not going to happen, and also it sets a precedent. I disagree. I mean, I would just withdraw the whip and then you'd put in some lefties instead. But it's just not going to happen. And in any case, in this case, it's not necessary because you can get.
You can get it anyway.
If the whip, if it's whipped, if it's a 3-line whip, there will be a rebellion. We know that there are some MPs who will not vote for it, but enough will. It is a gamble, but I just think anything now is a gamble. No, all options are bad. Who wants to? I mean, again, an election in cold, dark December is not great, but I don't think it's great either for Boris Johnson to get through his withdrawal agreement bill and Brexit to happen, and then to pose as triumphant. I got Brexit done, and then hope that the anti-Tory alliance fragments as angry Remainers defect to the Liberal Democrats and therefore grant him a majority for a hard right government. So I just think it is a risk. It's a huge gamble, but we don't have a choice, and we might as well come out swinging. Might as well embrace it, make a virtue of it. This is a historic election. Get mobilised, get fighting. We can have the courage and determination to force those at the top of society to pay their taxes, to pay just taxes, to fund our public services, to build the housing we need, to scrap tuition fees, to bring utilities under the control of the British people, not private profiteers. This is within reach. We could win that government by Christmas and allow the people to decide on Brexit. We should make people feel excited and enthused about it, not forced upon us reluctantly.
We need some iconic winter merch this time around, don't we?
Yeah,
it does pose challenges having an election in winter, but I think puffer jackets, like kind of Machino style with Labour, scarves, football scarves, woolly hats.
Yeah, a lot of woolly hats, scarves, lots of scarves, just warm sort of tat.
We're going to do a shortish show today because I need to let Owen go soon after 9, and obviously these are emergency shows, so it gets a little bit speculative. I'm going to ask you, I suppose, one more question, a positive note from me, well, although I don't know how seriously we should take it, and then I'm going to get some questions from the audience. So if you start putting your questions in there now, I'll put those to Owen in a mo. I just want to put to you this Comres poll, which is being shared widely today on Twitter, giving people some hope. So they've asked people, if the deadline for the UK to leave the EU has been extended beyond the 31st of October, how will you vote? And in this hypothetical situation, Labour beat the Tories on 27%, the Conservatives on 26%, Brexit Party on 20%, and the Lib Dems on 18%. How confident do you feel, or how significant do you think passing the 31st of October deadline will be? Or do you think this is really wishful thinking here?
I think the problem with that poll, I retweeted it, but I think
we need some good news, right?
Yeah, I think that poll is. Look, I think at the moment, even polls that aren't speculative in that way we should probably, look, we saw last time when Labour started on 24 points and the Tories started on 44, and then Labour ended up on 40 points, 2 points behind the Conservatives. So, and I think even in this particular case, when you're asking a hypothetical, it's meaningless. But I do think in a general election campaign where Labour have popular domestic policies, where they tell Remainers, here's a route back for Remain, and the Tory Brexit deal actually comes under scrutiny, the likes of Nigel Farage will toxify at one end and we'll do the same on the other end. It's not, obviously, it's still hard, it's still a challenge. The odds are stacked against us, we might as well be honest. The underdog is an understatement in this particular case. So the Tories have every chance, but it is within grasp, it's within reach. So I think at the moment, we should be, what we should think is Boris Johnson's way less popular than Theresa May was before an election was called. His deal is shit and can be shown to be shit in a way the media have focused on theatre. In an election campaign, broadcasting rules kick in, we can unpick it, but also pivot to the domestic issues where Labour are on much stronger ground than the Tory party, who have presided over a lost decade of cuts and stagnation. So I just think, poll schmoles at the moment, they're all over the place. Different polls give very different results based on weighting. As in how it's weighted to demographics and how people report how they voted in the last election. But we've just, in a sense, this is out of our hands. We have to have an election.
Sorry, I'm just collecting questions. There's some great ones. Nick Driscoll, will Johnson avoid standing in Uxbridge?
No, I really think this is very unlikely. And Ali there is he's the antithesis of Boris Johnson, a working class guy, grew up partly on benefits, Muslim, comes from a refugee migrant family. Is someone rooted in his community, passionately believes in everything that he fights for, doesn't, instead of just believing in himself, not a lying con man and a racist and all the other things that Boris Johnson is. I would, and last time in 2015, Boris Johnson won a majority of 10,500. That dropped to 5,000 2 years later. So it is winnable for Labour. That is a winnable seat. And the polling there suggests that there's been a shift away. It only narrowly voted for Leave, according to the evidence we have, but now the evidence suggests it's gone to on the Remain side. So it is winnable. But if Boris Johnson gives up, just leaves a seat of 5,000 on the basis he thinks he's going to lose it to get.
It's not a great look.
It's not an ideal look, is it?
There is an update. So Josh Mills has just commented to say that Paul Mason has just tweeted that Johnson is looking at parachuting into David Davis's safe seat in East Yorkshire. Would love it if he tries.
Well, I mean, if he does that, it would be the biggest, wimpiest, most cowardly start to any election campaign. He does have the smallest majority of any prime minister since the 1920s, and he could be the first prime minister in the history of democracy to lose his seat in an election, which would be fantastic. It would be. I genuinely don't think I would stop laughing. I mean, Ian Duncan Smith as well to Faiza Shaheen, who's a brilliant, again, the antithesis of Ian Duncan Smith, someone who is intelligent for a start, but also is a fighter for people who don't have a voice, and you know, is the sort of MP Labour desperately needs. So it's game on. These seats can be won. The more you go through these seats, you know, again, Ian Duncan Smith, I'm such a nerd, but I know too many of these majorities off by heart. He won a majority of 8,500 in 2015. Last time round, it went down to 2,500. So he could not easily, but he could, with a lot of effort, lose that seat. So people have to look at, that people have to have confidence going into this.
There's a few questions about voting at 16 or 17. So Bliss Winters, how likely do you think 16 to 17-year-olds gaining the vote in this election is? And Lawrence Dunn asks, any way to force a one-line bill and get votes for 16-year-olds?
Might as well give it a go. I think it's worth looking into. I think if Labour can put that... I don't actually know... If only James Butler was here, because he'd know exactly how the logistics hit. Because if Labour could just put down a piece of legislation calling for a general election on December the 12th and giving enfranchising 16 and 17-year-olds... for me, I believe in a quid pro quo. You introduce political education in schools... because that's denied from young people, which is absurd. So people are educated about how democracy works in exchange for giving 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote, and they should have the right to vote in this election.
Ellie Mayo Hagan is disagreeing with you, Owen. I disagree with Owen about Johnson in Uxbridge. The bigger catastrophe is the PM losing his seat. No way he'll stand in Uxbridge.
I know that is the Ellie Mayo Hagan view, and I hugely respect my good comrade and friend Ellie Mayo Hagan. Hi. I mean, again, I would look. I mean, in a sense, like, this is win-win for me, because I don't get if he does it. I mean, it's so I've gone and campaigned there myself.
It's going to be so motivating, isn't it? If he is standing in a seat where we can win and we can all campaign for a really good left-wing candidate.
The best start to any election campaign. So I agree. Obviously, the Prime Minister losing a seat in an election would be a calamity, but it's such a lack of confidence in his party's own prospects. If he thinks a seat which narrowly voted Leave in the last election, where he has a majority over 5,000, is potentially going to be lost to the Labour Party, then I mean, but I will see it when I believe it, because it's such an unprecedented show of weakness by a Prime Minister before an election, but also hilarious, the idea of it. So
this is a really good question, something I was thinking about today. Andrew asked, January election, students back at uni, yay or nay? Really worried about students not voting. That's hundreds of thousands of lost voters. So the date they proposed, the 12th of December, for many people is outside of term time. Yeah, and there were seats that swung to Labour last time around, and people thought that was down to students. So places like Canterbury, for example.
Well, yeah, I mean, Canterbury, which Labour won for the first time, ever. It was a Tory seat since the 19th century. The others, which, Cambridge went from marginal to a decisive Labour seat. Lancaster and Fleetwood, again, lots of students, again, went from marginal to far bigger Tory majority. That's Cat Smith, who's a lefty and also a shadow minister. I mean, I think if the argument then is to try and push for one by the 5th of December, which obviously curtails the general election campaign. If it is the 12th, then there has to be a mass postal vote campaign for students.
Or tactical voting, because sometimes actually they'll be going home to a marginal as well.
And Momentum have a online tool for this. So
to say what's the most strategic place for you to place your vote? It's
called Univote, I think. What students can do is look up. I think it's Univote. Look up Momentum, that Univote or something, and that basically, if you're a student, type in your postcode into that tool, and it instantly tells you where is the best place to vote, home or university. And sometimes, of course, it is better for you to vote at your university residence. Sometimes it's better to vote at your home address.
All right, this is a good question from Joseph O. Question: do we need an offensive anti-Lib Dem campaign the way we campaign against the Tories?
I mean, I think one of the best ways in in Labour Tory seats, I do think the most positive, the campaign needs to be positive and optimistic. A new Britain is within reach. We can build it together. Have courage, have optimism. And in those Tory Labour seats, make it clear there's a straight choice between a hard Brexit and a hard right government, or a people's vote, which is the only possible route back to Remain, plus all these goodies that the Lib Dems can't offer. What the Lib Dems... Look, the Lib Dems, in a sense, there are lots of seats in the southwest where Labour really aren't in the game, where the Lib Dems are trying to win back Tory Remainers. And one of the reasons they're being so hard on Corbyn is they think that unless they reassure Tory Remainers they won't prop up a Corbyn-led government, they won't win those votes over. So I think in the southwest... where the Labour's not really in play. But in the Tory Labour marginals, the seats that Labour need to defend or to win from the Conservatives to secure a majority, I think obviously people need to be reminded of the Lib Dems' rampant, disgusting record in plunging this country into its current disaster, driving people into misery, slashing benefits, slashing living standards, decimating public services, privatising public services. That needs to be reminded, but I think it needs to go heavy on Labour being the only party that offers a way back to Remain and having all the goodies that the Lib Dem party, which is looking for Tory Remain votes, can never, ever offer, which is tax the rich, actually get rid of tuition fees, not treble them, all of those sorts of things, which I think, people will, not stupid, they will see the contrast. And I think a lot of people realise that if they vote Lib Dem in those marginals, they might as well just vote for Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg because the Tories will come through the middle.
It's interesting to look at how the Tories have dealt with the Brexit pie, which is kind of to avoid talking about them, because I think the Tories want to make people believe that there's quite a permeable boundary between voting Brexit and voting Tory, and you should vote for whichever one is more tactical in your area. And I think there is something to be said for that in that Labour should be saying, look, be tactical about this. Love bomb people who are considering voting Lib Dem. And I think to love bomb people who are considering voting Lib Dem means it's super important that you look like your priority is not attacking the Lib Dem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, look, the kind of two... I wrote about this in my column this week because there was this kind of conflict between... So it's only 2.5 years ago, we need to remember this, that 40% of the electorate crossed the psychological barrier that they were prepared to vote for a Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn. It's actually about 41-42% if you exclude Northern Ireland, where Labour don't stand candidates. But another psychological barrier has been crossed for some of those people since, which is particularly this year, to vote for the Liberal Democrats and not to consider that, to almost, not write them off because of their disgusting role in government with the Conservatives. But I think, I think people need to love bomb those voters. These are people who voted for a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party just over 2 years ago, and I think they can be won back if the domestic agenda is once again front and centre. The reason people fell in love back then, it's almost like trying to rekindle a romance which has gone cold and embittered. And, maybe, people aren't even in the same bedroom anymore, but maybe eventually during a campaign they'll just knock on the door and just maybe even snuggle up into bed. And
is it Love Actually where you go with the sort of signs where it's sort of...
Yeah, that's creepy though. That
would be a bit creepy if we did that, do you think?
Well, I mean, that whole scene is extremely creepy. I don't know why Love Actually's got away with the creepiness that permeates its plot.
We're going to finish on a topic that I know you're very passionate about. So there's a question from Tweevy. Are the Tories likely to use trans rights as a wedge issue in an upcoming election? And related is A. Cassiopeia. I don't know quite how you pronounce that. A. Cassiopeia. Not much of a question, but given the launch of anti-trans group LGB Alliance, can we get a trans rights from Owen and Mike? Would mean the world to me. So you can get a trans rights, definitely.
Trans rights.
Oh, we're supposed to do that shit.
Trans rights.
Trans rights.
That's better. This is
and there's also a question attached to it.
It's a really, really frightening prospect because what the Tories did in the 1980s was try and use gay rights, the rights of gay, bisexual, and gay, bisexual men and women as a wedge issue. And that's why they introduced Section 28. They ran a moral panic where they spoke in conjunction with the Tory press, talking about loony left councils, which were, promoting homosexual lifestyles. And Section 28 forbid that, which meant people like you and me grew up. Well, I think you might have actually... No, you were still at school probably after Section 28 was repealed. But anyway, I didn't get any LGBTQ education whatsoever. And what they're trying to do now, one of the reasons...
I had G in that. We had a good video which was the A to Z of sex. And we had a G section which was gay.
We didn't have a G.
It was about 3 minutes of a PSHRE lesson.
I just skipped it. It went from... F to H.
G is banned. This section has been banned by the Conservative Party.
So so there's two things here. Firstly, Penny Mordaunt, who was the minister responsible for that brief, was supportive of reforming the law, the Gender Recognition Act, in line with, for example, Ireland, streamlining it and stopping it being this medicalised, bureaucratic and often very degrading process. And because of this huge moral panic, there's been a moral panic whipped up by most of the British media in the last 2 years in particular. And she's been replaced by Liz Truss, who is seen to be not on the trans rights, not supportive of trans rights or reforming the law in that way at all. And Dominic Cummings is reportedly have commissioned polling in certain Labour seats about using trans rights as a wedge issue. This is disgusting and despicable. It's very obviously shows actually how out of touch he is with so many working class people who he really thinks are just going to be motivated in this general election to vote for his party based on hatred and fear and bigotry towards a minority which has become, which is one of the most besieged and attacked minorities with all the consequences, terrible consequences that has for trans people. And Labour has to unequivocally stand up for LGBTQ people, obviously. Otherwise, you might as well pack it in. But they are trying to repeat what they did in the 1980s. They're trying to fight a cultural war. And we have to fight back.
Haneen A asks, how would they make it a wedge issue? Won't it clearly seem like punching down at people that are rarely represented? Unfortunately, when the Conservatives create a wedge issue, that's often precisely what it's doing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. I think
it usually works quite well for them.
I think it would backfire if they look. The thing that there was a reason that David Cameron pushed forward equal marriage, because even though most Tory MPs didn't vote for it and it was only passed because Labour and Lib Dem MPs voted for it, but the reason he pushed equal marriage was to try and detoxify a Tory party which was associated with nastiness and hatred towards minorities. I mean, something a very rollback on that, I appreciate. But if they go heavy on it, even people who don't really know about trans rights or maybe don't know any trans people and have question marks and all the rest, they will just look at it and go, this is ugly and horrible and nasty. I have faith in people. I do not think their view, I think, of working class people in many of the seats they're targeting is they are just a bunch of ignorant bigots, and that is just so far from the truth. And polling has shown before that working class people, some polling has shown that have been more supportive of, for example, gay rights than middle class people. Anyone who has experience of, I used to work as a barman in Manchester's gay village, which was it was not full of middle class bohemians. It was, is a working class. We've been out, we got drunk together there. It has a very strong, proud working class ethos. Working class people are gay, bisexual, and trans as well, and working class people have LGBTQ friends and relatives. So if they think they can win through this poison, they can go fuck themselves, because actually people have, are not the hateful bigots they think they are. And I think it'll be a humiliation if they try. But we've got to fight unequivocally for people's rights against that.
All right, I'm going to let you get off because I know you've got places to be. But I suppose to finish the show, what should be Labour's top lines for this general election? What is our, in a couple of sentences, what's our claim? Or what's the Labour Party's claim to be the next government in Britain?
Let the people decide on Brexit, not the politicians, and build a new country run in the interests of the majority, not the vested interests who've plunged us into disaster, and solve all the injustices that don't just scar British society, have courage, determination, optimism, build that new, just, free Britain in which everyone can flourish and prosper, because that is within reach.
Owen Jones, thank you so much for joining us this evening on this emergency issue edition of Tisky Sour. I am certain there will be many of these coming up over the coming days and weeks. Potentially there's going to be a show tomorrow evening as well, so look out for that on our social media channels. As ever, if you are a supporter of Novara Media, thank you very much. You are what makes this show possible. If not, please go to support.novaramedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. We will see you soon. Good night.